Welcome, everybody. Has everybody been having a great time at the conference? And we're at the last session, so I'm sure everybody's exhausted, but uplifted from everything that you've learned, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, great. All right, well, I would like to introduce our last speaker in this room anyway. This is Ben Malczewski.
That's acceptable.
All right.
Many different corruptions.
All right. And he's the manager of the Humanities Department at the Lucas County Library. And today he's going to talk about personal narratives in public places, considering space and self in a digital age. Sounds intriguing, doesn't it? All righty, Ben.
Thank you very much. I have to say, walking around today, it's just, I'm always just, I guess I'm never taken aback by it. I'm always, or never unsurprised by it. The museum, I love the museum so much. I'm so happy as an extension of that, two favorite places in the world, museums and libraries, and that I get to work in the library. But, you know, I'm kind of biased. I go to the library every day. So coming to the museum, I just realized I can't like it better. It's just so, something about it. It relaxes the nerves, calms me down. At about the time, nap time too, 4 o'clock. So, brave souls, thank you. I'll try to make this as exciting as possible. And I realize that there's different ways that you can kind of engage the audience. You can be charismatic, or merely informational, and they can be intrigued that way. But I've also had some cutting edge animation in these PowerPoint slides too. So if that's not a contradiction in terms of little Easter eggs you can look for, I'm sure, yes, that'll wow you. Basically, well, you'll hear through this too, me say, oh, a subtext of this, or basically it's about this. It's about so many different things. How we read and relate to our surroundings, how our spaces reflect and project our identity, and how technology, now more than ever, is affecting this relationship. The examination of this is relatively new, partially because the advancement of technology and how we're interacting with it, and the pace is much faster than it's ever been. I had no idea, as I get to further slides here, and kind of set the premise for this, I had no idea that this study, this kind of discourse, this conversation would encompass so much of my life, that I'd be writing about it and presenting on it and doing these different things. It was truly just a moment that kind of served as a catalyst for much more. And then professionally too, to talk about this kind of integration of technology and still trying to keep a balance with the human side and the biological side and the neurological side of us, keeping us human. I'm beta testing and helping on develop a lot of the maker spaces that we have now at the library. So we're talking about integrating and how to do that in a way that treats the human and speaks to the human too. I found that libraries are kind of a happy accident that we should become. I was speaking to an architect the other day about it, guinea pigs for a lot of this stuff. But we've had a lot of this stuff thrown upon us, how to deal with technology and to guide it, and to do it in a way that's responsible and substantial and not just exhibitional or sensational. Because there's a danger in that side too, especially when you're an institution that's rooted in enrichment. So it's kind of been crazy, the development of this too. A lot of the challenge of it too is it's finding, because it's relatively new and not much has been written about it, it's so multidisciplinary. So I kind of have had to root through different, and lean on the keypad as I do that. I've had to root through different multidisciplinary kind of curriculums and subject areas and things of that nature. It involves technology and history and future of, architecture, interior design, anthropology, sociology, engineering, literary studies, art history, film studies, linguistics, cognitive and behavioral psychology, environmental design, and obviously, similarly visual literacy. I found to kind of shoehorn all that, or to ease the communication or to ease the reception of it, I found the best way to present it in kind of a stream of thought way, so that the thought can kind of develop, the idea can develop organically. Beginning, the presage of this arrived one night while I was watching TV in my family room, where I saw this, and I'll play it without the sound if I can. If it will let me. But it was the Microsoft commercial called The Almighty Cloud. And I had one of those. It's probably because it was wintertime, and we've had these really long, crippling, morale-busting, breaking winters that room was kind of this hyperbolic chamber where anything that happened therein I would totally take out of proportion and blow up. But it was one of these where I was watching TV in the family room where I saw this cool by committee Microsoft couple praising the glories of the Almighty Cloud. My imagination gathered that the C should be capitalized owing to the exultant background choral praise when the words were announced. So Microsoft was really pushing this concept of the cloud. It was kind of new, this about 4 or 5 years ago. Of course, the couple never asked to be stuck in the airport on delay that day, and now on top of that, they were without their personalized media entertainment. So being so close to hell, one questions if the ethereal glance would even be worth it. But they needn't look all the way. Halfway would do. So the husband in an epiphany remembers the cloud, yay cloud. And that's served as their tagline for a little while as they were trying to kind of shoehorn this into the mainstream. Remembering that only the drought-stricken saw clouds as anything more but portentous loomers and feeling immediately threatened, I first looked at my coolly rendered vinyl record covers, my special edition DVDs, photographs, books, and then to the furniture that was designed to hold and display their analog shapes. I felt their surface identities as unique to medium creative expressions and projections of my own memory and identity fade to nostalgia and sepia tone, or sepia tone before my eyes, devalued and devoid under this catch-all umbrella of content. So I felt this storm coming. This predicament was difficult for a pop culture geek who also happened to be a librarian. In the case of DVDs, I felt not only felt my love for the box art, special edition sets, extras, see, I told you, dynamic, voiceover commentaries, alternative endings, deleted scenes, foreign versions, and signed editions threatened. I saw the dismantling of these passionately archived document assemblages, many of them painstakingly researched anthropological time capsules in their own right, such as Criterion or Keynote, as a deconstruction not in a manner revealing essence, but rather devolutionary. This should not be misread as an instant's lament for things past, or even feeling akin to that fateful awkwardness when new puppy is brought home to meet old dog. I consider myself very tech-centric. As I said, working with different makerspaces and 3D printers. For a long time I've been doing media market analysis. I'm on the Penguin Random House Library Advisory Board, so I'm privy to a lot of these different, a lot of them increasingly more electronic statistics and e-format backroom discussion. We talk about pricing models and how people are really using it and things like that. So it's in my brain, it's in my world. But I shouldn't be shaken in that regard, but it never quite hit home. So I think the mainstreaming of this in a weird way, actually seeing it in affect my house, it never really hit home like that before. So as a consequence of this relationship, I began to consider the practical and emotional relationships we have with all of our stuff, and how that acquisition, their acquisition and ownership has shaped and organized our physical world. The interior purposing of our lives and working places, I'll use libraries as an example for that, for the public places, has been designed for it and around analog technology. So how does a shift to a digitized content environment actualize itself physically? How will our personal and public spaces look as a result? A great deal of the space in my home is dedicated to books, music, and movies, and indeed they have become part of the aesthetic and the character of my style, one of the components at least. So what now if they were suddenly deleted? I wondered if reconceptualizing our notion of content meant redefining the functionalism of our physical surroundings. Did the function of the spaces at all change? Perhaps not, but it certainly affected the makeup of the space, the furniture, the shelves, the tables, which have been basically the same for millennia. We don't typically think of our possessions as content. In fact, we wouldn't even think to refer to them so coldly as possessions, but rather simply calling them by their name. And the word is hardly a colloquial synonym for books, films, or music. The word content seems reserved for fluorescently lit back-end technical discussion. It feels impersonal and lacks character and personality, and thus sociability. Content, in this definitive state, doesn't give us anything emotionally to connect with, nor does it identify itself or speak to us in any way. It is the encryption of substance. It feels like barcode data representation, and inasmuch as we are not ourselves barcode readers, we cannot extract the meaning from it nor make a connection. The sort of question, what sort of content do you like, or did you see the latest comically toned, non-fictional content based on the experiences of domestic cats on YouTube, would evoke little more than a disturbed, confused look, and possibly have you reported to the authorities. There's a reductive or homogenized or prosaic aspect to the word too. It doesn't differentiate, it isn't special. It lumps all this creative output into the same category. It suggests fodder, feeder, muted, monotone, white noise. And I'm guilty of using this too. I'll do website design, and we'll have these publications or things, and we'll just say, we need content for this spot. And so I feel like I'm also talking in that way out of the other side of my mouth. Yet, it's just bereft of anything individual or special. It kind of takes the artistry out of it. But I'm jumping the gun with this too, and we'll address this contradiction a little bit later on. And before I get carried away with this, the beginning, that lead-in, is kind of a very typical, I use it for that example because it's a typical response to something foreign in that too. It feels intrusive, we feel threatened, it's a fear-based response. So I kind of use myself, and in the organic kind of flow of this, was using myself as also kind of a sample or an example of this too. So I kind of now will pan out and to something of an establishing shot. And we'll look at how the addition of, or before we look at how the addition of an ingredient, technology in this case, affects the balance of the dish, let's examine the dish itself. So this will kind of, the purpose of this next part is to kind of develop some sort of a glossary or lexicon by which to look at kind of the generalness of the discussion and the breakdown of these. In a building, it's not to just read the slide, but a building is an inanimate object, but it is not an inarticulate one. Architecture is a kind of language, one that most designers, builders, decorators speak to varying degrees of fluency, for better or for worse, but that all of us hear. Any home or building is a three-dimensional text. And in many ways, it's more of a universal language because it's not bound by words, but rather dynamically enriched by colors, shapes, and textures. Buildings can speak formally or informally, simply or more complexly. They change over time, grow and shrink with new owners, and in doing so, their meanings change. And just as with spoken or written language, simple speech favors short words or sentences with minimal descriptors. Minimalism in design, in early America, for example, was largely the result of limited resources. But today, as a deliberate choice of construction, it often will imply authenticity, straightforward values, a green lifestyle. Child psychologists even have a name for this too, the happy home. And surely we can all envision this square, 1 or 2 floors, a peaked roof, and a centrally located front door, and it looks like a face. And often things we design, literally, we want to identify with and have a relationship to. We want to see ourselves in them. So it's no accident that these things should resemble that, and often pleasant. Complex language favors elaboration. Long words and sentences, striking metaphors, intricate constructions. Wow. They're highly embellished and elaborate. The levels of ornamentation are very elaborate too. Dramatic windows, romantic balconies, and lacy trim. Done well, they convey a sense of being charming, but often they're associated with artifice and ostentationness. This is, of course, the painted ladies in San Francisco. They can be difficult to relate to, and inasmuch they carry an air of dishonesty in their lack of straightforwardness. Think now of the commonly represented haunted house. It's often Victorian. Their lack of associability and superfluous design implies immorality and deceit and evil, while unadorned, simple and purposeful design often represents itself as being honest or good. The simple design is straightforward. We understand it. It's not. It doesn't seem artifice. Physically speaking, they can be large or small, open or closed, dark and light as well. And all these carry direct and indirect associations, implications, and derivable meanings to us. Large is like a loud voice or a big physique. Often through a lot of this too, a lot of these terms have a personified element to them as well. So this is like a hefty physique. It's likely expensive. It wants to also demonstrate that too. Was time-consuming to erect, and to some degree is meant to impose and feel intimidating. I've actually been around this building too, and it is just huge. They are demonstrations often of power. Houses of government, cathedrals, tombs, museums. Even as an adult, you may feel like a child in them. And this building actually does have that effect too. The windows are not only huge, they're impossible to open. You can't reach the handles. The staircases are huge and dwarf you. You take time to climb them and labor consciously over an otherwise routine process. You can't traverse the space quickly either, and you feel not only the immensity of the task, but to a degree you are reduced in its presence as well. It places you, and it humbles you, and there are reasons for this too. As Stuart Brand points out, more space in domestic buildings is equated with freedom. In commercial buildings, it means profit. In institutional buildings, it means power. Or at least it tries to suggest these things. By manifesting human concepts in them and attributes to them, banks, for example, look impregnable to reassure you that your deposits, your money will be safe.
What was that building?
I would butcher it. It's in Rome. It's in, I believe, the Napoleonic Palace. There's a much more eloquently spoken Italian name for it. Yes. And right outside of there too is where Mussolini was hanged. But it's truly, it is absolutely huge. It doesn't even feel like you can actually connect with it. It's completely dwarfs you. Small places, on the other hand, carry descriptors like cozy, nesting, snug, safe, self-sufficient, hidden. Think of the places in children's literature where kids will shelter themselves from the dangers of the outside world. But the key attribute of small is that it has to feel secure, because the flip side of confined is restricted, dominated, and trapped. Is it more womb-like or is it prison-like? Which actually makes the familiar story, Hansel and Gretel, just, can there be a much more cruel or sinister story? I mean, you're preying on this notion of, they're in this bad situation where, the woods, there's shadows and darkness and mysteriousness, and it's a scary place in its own. And then you see this cottage that's as if a kid were to draw it, simple in design, but then adorned and embellished with candy. And light in color often, but everything that should feel secure and safe. This oasis in the middle of this very kind of vulnerable space. And it was one of those where I reading literature about some of this design, man, that is just the most evil, cruel story in the world. Open or shut speaks to the approachability of the building itself, the people or the processes inside, or what's contained. To reach the office of a very important person, you typically have to pass through many gates, barriers, doors, corridors, anterooms, likely encountering various forms or degrees of security on the way. There is a more traditional approach to protection, traditional approach to protection, carrying a lineage dating back to castles or even further. This actual map here is in Greece, and it's a kind of overview of a kind of a fortress. Supermarkets rip on this concept too to keep you in place longer. They'll put staples like bread or milk at the furthest outreach from the entrance, so you'll encounter and buy more things you never intended to on the way to them. I can't recall the source at this point, but I actually just heard recently that something like 60% of what people actually did the store with wasn't on their list going in. It's fodder for comedians too, but like the grocery carts and the one bad wheel and that, they're also designed to be maneuverable, but not too maneuverable. They don't want them to work too well or too quickly. And the children's seats are, of course, at a level 2, not because it's convenient for us, but so that they're at the prime. This is like the range where the people that pay the stores money to buy that prime real estate where their products are. So it's based on them encountering these things. And open spaces, on the other hand, I think of as a welcoming gesture, or the way even that an inanimate object can pantomime. Think of how you might approach an unknown dog. It'd be palms up, relaxed fingers, not tense, but basically almost, literally showing your hand, unthreatening transparency, nothing up your sleeves, trustworthy. Dark and light are related, but varied versions of closed and open. Dark is obviously it's threatening, gloomy, mysterious, in mourning, scary. Again, darkness is an often used element in literature and film too, or even a character, as in film noir. Shadows, blackened out shapes, shrouded figures. It makes us insecure. We can't quite identify something completely. Our clarity and perception of reality and the context then feels skewed or obstructed. What we think about with light and dark is the air, the color of it, the mood of it. From an interior perspective, darkly painted rooms are often filled with heavy furniture too, made of lush, heavy fabric or deep, heavy woods. As there's always at least a duality in perceiving any of these principles, people can either find this warm and luxurious or ominous and oppressive. As a reaction, a lot of this too, this isn't to pick on Victorian design, but as a reaction to this more Victorian type of interior design, 20th century designers reacted to this by opening up the space, painting the rooms in lighter colors, swapping in lighter woods and more simply designed furniture. They got rid of the curtains and drapes too, unblocking the windows. And just as the breeze could now let in, people could speak and act more freely. This really marked a movement to mirroring the intention of the space to the mood of the decoration. A common or more sociable room might be lighter, while conversely, though coexisting in the same structure, a bedroom may be darker or more densely or heavily decorated too, to achieve this womb-like or warming effect. Form follows function is a common theme of modernist architecture, and I mentioned coexisting because you wouldn't find that heavy, that overwhelming theme threaded through. Now where it's a little bit kind of a la carte, depending based on mood in that sense. So the purpose of that was to kind of just, there's so many different ways you can delve into so many different aspects of those, but those are just kind of the basic elements of a room, a building as we go through it. And I want to get to now is the personal spaces. And so much of this I conceive of At some point, in those rainy day thoughts, this could be communicated in a very visual way as something of like I think of like a documentary. And I think of this spot of going through our personal places really in that visual sense. And in my head, I always see a foot touching the floor and kind of the narrator going through from the moment that we wake up. But from the moment we wake up, we immediately begin assessing and making assumptions about our physical environment. Using our homes as demonstrated examples in this case, our morning routine dissected reveals how everything that fills our world has been designed in one way or another with a purpose to complement. The interface of the alarm clock, how many buttons, is it digital? How is the snooze incremented? A faucet handle, one or two. Our toothbrush, is it electric? Our shower head, handheld. We choose the objects that make up our world based on how well we understand them, their roles, their characteristics, and how they congruent or compromise our lives and worldview. When we see an object, we make so many instantaneous assumptions about that object, what it does, how it does it, how much it should cost, how to react, how to communicate with it, how it connects to you, how you touch it, hold it. Every object speaks to the person who put it there. We weigh its features and functions with its aesthetics and consider the clarity of its design and organization of the display, often in a matter of seconds. We even choose some based on failed or poor experiences with previous or alternative models or designs, what they don't do, or rather what they do better. This relationship is rooted in our cognitive development from infancy as we develop conscious response expectations based on memory and prior experiences, how we're conditioned in that regard. And we learn from our awareness of concurrent validations, as well as violations of our expectations. Whether intentional or subconscious, we innately seek to navigate our world in the easiest, frictionless, obstructionless, most direct and efficient manner as possible. We don't just happen upon these objects by accident, and the same can be said for books or other artistic or creative objects in our home too. We thought about them, we studied them, we got to know their voices, learned how they did, what they did, why they were different, and might have even been pleasingly perplexed by them. To a degree, we saw or heard ourselves in them, or discovered an approach that directly or indirectly was congruent with our interests, fascinations, or worldview. Or maybe we just wanted to see ourselves in them, or aspired to be them. And so we acquired them and brought them into our homes, where they became intimates. We connected and identified with them, and they in turn became extensions of ourselves and symbolic reflections of who we are. Physically displayed content brings multiple meaningful dimensions and extrapolations to our spaces, and its removal would no doubt make the space feel barren, as if to void the space of life itself. One e-reader on the proverbial bookshelf doesn't have the representative effect of even a single physical book with its unique cover design, color palette, font, etc. What is to happen when the bookshelf is empty? What then becomes the point of the bookshelf? How will anyone know that you have read The Great Gatsby or think that you actually read Ulysses? This depiction of depersonalized space, I missed that one. This depiction of depersonalized space is rooted in a cinematic sci-fi vision of the future, sometimes sterile, sometimes septic, but frequently soulless and humorlessness. And so I wondered in that too. I think of these different movies that I've seen, and they always just show someone sitting in this really like cold, barren room. That's like the future. There is something, it was like Padme in the last Star Wars prequels, last of those. And she was pregnant and kind of, in this really pensive mood and frustrated. She's just in this barren room. There's nothing on the tables that were around. There's nothing on the walls. Just like, I'm sure it was actually a blue screen that she was around, but it was just, there was nothing there. I thought, oh, what a cold surface. And even Burgess's homes in 2000, or A Clockwork Orange rather, 2001, of course, but even in A Clockwork Orange, even the homes in them, they're very cold. He's a very cold director too, and you have that disconnection in a lot of his works, but I'm always taken aback in those parts of the movies. Those characterless living rooms designed solely for the procedural now seem potential harbingers, suggesting that even future relationships with our surroundings might feel as disconnected as an actor cast against a blue screen. If content is the encryption of substance, it is often an idea in search of a container and a communicative vessel. It is often displaced, but e-readers, tablets, computers, books, and even rooms and buildings themselves in general are empty vessels, only as good or as useful as the content and its many manifestations they provide. In this sense, too, I often will think of this as we're redesigning and revisiting aspects of our library. A question that I'll use to kind of recenter from time to time is, so why is this space different from a warehouse or a bookstore? And that's just kind of an aside note there. Though we're easily distracted by the container, for technology and all of its exoticism has always been sexy. It has always been about the content, whether file or software. An e-reader has little purpose without an e-book, just as much as a book with blank pages, while priceless as a metaphor, says nothing itself. The story is what matters. And culturally, we've been distracted by this. Everything tells a story, a stock quote, an app. Things designed really well tell really good stories. And we need to tell stories. For us, it's a biological function. We have a neurologically rooted tribal relationship with our physical world. As social animals, human beings need some sort of food or some form of community, whether cave, cabin, condo, or club. We have gathered for protection and food and have formed tribes and exhibited tribal behavior. As civilization has advanced, our tribes have become more numerous and specific, developing into institutions, communities, and countries. With the proliferation of internet-based social networking channels like Facebook or Twitter, we have expanded from face-to-face communication to create an exponentially more expansive and powerful paradigm of tribalism online. Networking catalysts can revolve around anything. Sports teams, foods, bands, movies, styles, clothing, hatreds, loves. No matter the outlet, the predominant characteristic of tribes throughout time has remained the same, fulfilling the need to communicate, to share our experiences and to tell our stories, and by doing so, this collective expression, we create a culture. When you consider the terminology, nomenclature, spaces, rooms, walls, etc., and the conceptualization of the virtual architecture, hardly anything has changed. We design and decorate both our physical and virtual worlds the same way, carefully revealing the story of ourselves, authored by ourselves, as we would like it to be told. Our spaces become projections of ourselves, reflecting how we want to be seen and what we want others to think of us, but mostly how we want to see ourselves. It is no coincidence that these two worlds conceptually resemble each other, because in the end they must fulfill the same function as an outward and inward projection of self. Our physical books, DVDs, photos, paintings, albums are no different than their JPEG or hyperlinked doppelgangers. They become avatars that reveal our identities to the outside world, telling others what bands we listen to, what our favorite movies are, what books we've read, and perhaps of equal importance, what bands we want others to think we like, what movies we want to be associated with, and what books we think will make us seem more erudite. Just as in real life, the primary audience for our projection is actually ourselves. Again, every object speaks to the person who put it there. In an abstract way, we think and suppose what someone else might be thinking of us based on what we feel these objects symbolize or represent. A book on its shelf is straightforwardly a source of information or knowledge, but it also represents both inwardly and outwardly an achievement or demonstration of worldliness or sophistication. This demonstrates our self-conscious awareness of our subconscious and speaks to the emotional relationship we have with our physical spaces and the vital role objects play in the creation of identity for ourselves and others. But what of this line that is crossed, or this connection that is made when the content becomes a mirror then projection of self? The moment when an object becomes subjective. It dawns on me too that, for me, kind of one of the parts of this, I didn't realize this from the beginning, but I began when I was studying English at the University of Edinburgh. One of the major areas of my study was the objective-subjective in poetry and in literature. And, you know, about this time, if this is a chronological kind of representation of that, I kind of realized, oh, I'm still studying that now. It's kind of one of those themes that you realize has kind of followed you, or, you know, you've been on that path throughout your whole life. Like, why am I still studying this? No matter every context I'm at, I'm still thinking about this. So Ezra Pound referred to this moment as when a thing outward and objective transforms itself or darts into a thing inward and subjective, and describes the moment of transformation as being an intellectual and emotional complex in an instance of time, which gives that sudden sense of liberation which we experience in the presence of great works of art. Joyce described this connected spark as an epiphany. And we may not make such a powerful hyperbolic leap every time we read or watch a film, but every object, not just content, that inhabits our world was hand-selected of us because of how well we understand it and its role or function, how it complements our experience or worldview, and also because of how well it communicates with us. When we physically hold a movie or a book, an emotional connection is made with that work. We associate with it and display this relationship. We project it to others and in turn see ourselves in it. Characterizing our personal spaces and adorning our public ones with physical objects not only decorates our rooms, but lets others know where we've been, who we like, what we've read, what we listen to, and what our influences are. And just as we internalize the artistic expression, often creating our own subtextual relationship and sense memories around it, where we saw it, who we saw it with, what we ate, what the weather was like, this continues with the physical product. Its presence on our shelf is akin to a photo album or diary. This is the self as personal historian, and objects as such become vital pillars in creating a sense of self through our past. So in one of the areas too, this is more of an introduction to things, but a lot of the research involves, it's kind of like an inverse approach to something, so studying the lack of something. So there's a lot of work that we have done looking at Alzheimer's patients. And so a lot of it's funny where the text and where these different components will kind of take you sometimes, but our memories of our past largely define ourselves, who we believe we are. And people with amnesia often will say that when they cannot remember their past, they feel disconnected, that they feel they've lost their self, themselves. And they aren't cued by things in the same way that we are. So content in this sense, this broad sense, is unsociable encryption, as it communicates nothing. So by personalizing the space, we stimulate memory and reinforce a sense of who we are. We can call these environmental cues that have these effects environmental personalization memory cues. Our objects are autobiographical memory anchors of our chronology. A home's identity is partially formed when the physical construct depicts the occupant's specific interests and needs, and further, it establishes a sense of individuality, as opposed to commonality which occurs on a public level. So this notion of commonality is both the mantra and perpetual challenge for the public building. It has to be many things at once to many different people. Moving forward and using the library as an example for this, while it's convenient, it's also apt because it embodies so many things simultaneously. It's entertainment, it's a civic space, it's a civic space, a workplace, a learning place, a teacher, and a third place, which is the notion, I think, Starbucks kind of spurred it, but it's the idea of the place between work and home. And what they've done, and bookstores have tried to do this with cafes and coffee shops within them, or even I've seen children's stores trying to do it with story times, with different ways to connect. Ultimately, what they're trying to do in that is build a conversation, build a cultural space that people want to hang out and linger in. And it actually pains me when I see some libraries going so far to these retail models and things, because through my discussions with publishers and that people want what we have so bad, that culture. And to see it, not that we do or any of these places do, but when I see places that have, it kind of pains me a little way to see them kind of just dismissing it, while other people, it's such a valuable asset too, and it connects us to that place so much. But this comes with a lot of expectations too. There's expectations of service and resources, also outcomes and interactions too. Many of them not just didactic or educationally enriching in nature, but emotional and psychological as well. How can we be everything to everyone at once? How can you speak to the individual as well as the group? How can the individual feel individually addressed and their voice not only expressed, but heard amongst the sea of other voices? This whole notion of being generally specific and specifically general. How can we provide and project those vital personalization memory cues that establish self, imprint identity, and anchor memories in people? Our awareness of place is critical to the definition of memory, and our physical environment is therefore essential to memory constitution. In order to be experienced as a memory, the information we retrieve must be recollected in the context of a particular time and place and with reference to oneself as a participant in the episode, often in a multisensory capacity. In order for a place, an event, or action to have any meanings in our lives, we have to play an active role in the narrative. So kind of showing you, and this isn't completely, all complete representation of what we'll use as mantras when we're reconfiguring spaces, but this is just kind of an overview of that. So the first one, what is your library's narrative or its narrative design? Good, effective, and meaningful design tells a story. What are you saying to your customers, your patrons, through their progression through the library space? What is the library's story? How do you want the story to be told or revealed? What are important accents or points? Furthermore, what part does each area or department play in the whole library story? Is it thematically in tune? Is it congruent? Each department is like a character, unique in focus, voice, focus, and tone, but an effective and contributive part of a larger arc as well. People appreciate opportunities to linger. This is influenced by the attitude and tone of the management and the friendliness of the staff as well as the other patrons. Again, kind of along the lines of being that third place. We often and obviously design purpose-driven space, but designing browsing or browsable or lingering space is just as important. Seems very obvious, but pleasant ambient conditions are very important too. Features include cleanliness, adequate lighting, good acoustics, and a noise level that, while not discouraged, is low but still encourages conversation. Pleasant or no aroma, natural light, views, pleasing decor. Seating is actually a bigger thing than people think about too. In looking at a lot of this, this is where kind of the anthropology aspect comes into too, is just, well, designing chairs, I think of it as you design the chair or you select the chair for how long you want the person to sit in the chair for. So if it's meant to be a spot that someone is to spend 2 hours in, the chair should keep them awake for 2 hours. If it's a 5-minute spot, it should be that way too. So depending on the function or desired outcome for that function, for that spot, the chair should suit that. And the feelings of prospect and refuge, this to us is kind of like judgment-free space. Customers, patrons almost prefer seats against walls, half walls or windows which provide feelings of being sheltered while still availing a view of the space and can invoke perspective. There's a lot of territorialism too that comes in public spaces. Favorite seats, computer terminals, protective of certain areas, it's their space. If this is not desirable, it becomes aggressive, we'll make the seating arrangements smaller, more public, and less accommodating to a longer stay. Social beings and familiar strangers, a presence person's presence in any third place seems to validate or confirm their presence as a social member of a community. For many people, the library, the study, collaboration, conversation is the main activity, but for others, the third place provides an opportunity to watch the action and see familiar strangers who enrich the lives of patrons in indirect ways. Feeling an active participant in society is empowering too. Successfully and beneficially using resources makes us feel good and accomplished, so it's enriching in that regard. A climate of trust. Trust is very important in everything. When that's climate of trust and respect is established, people feel welcome and they're able to relax and be themselves. Support, part of the social climate of the library or any third place is the support provided by the staff to other staff, the staff to patrons, and the patrons to each other. And place attachment. A well-designed and managed third place often results in feelings of place attachment, people bonding to special places. So I mentioned narrative design. Dialectal design I look at as, I think of something as, just as we have, linguistically, we have accents. This, in architectural terms too, it can be the accent of the design, so it can have a Spanish influence or a French influence or something like that. But I think in terms of the functionality and the purpose of a building too, that to me is a type of accent. It's the voice you wish to project. And dialectal refers to the region and the local side of it. So it's native materials, things that are important, things for them that they can connect to. And another thing, a concept that I just wanted to introduce briefly too, but it definitely could spur a more in-depth discussion, but it's how we occasion space. And how, when I was thinking of this too, is about the time when my daughter was born. She's 3 now, but when she was 1, I would kind of look to her as this unspoiled sample of how one interacted and would engage in an activity. And the way the elements that she would set forth herself to construct a scene. So when she would want to read something, she would kind of stage these elements, these things around her that were important to her, that put her in a spot that could conduce the activity. So she wasn't even, in a sense, just constructing a scene, she was defining that space so that she was best prepared to do that. And I think of it in the same way as a director would have, their mise en scène, which is everything out here. A chef would have their mise en place, and it's all the ingredients, all the components that they need to express something, the dish, whatever it may be. So it's really interesting looking then kind of converting that concept to the library world and seeing that it still happened on that level, that people would stage elements and everything that they have would be around what they wanted to do. And just how important that is to us. It's a very physical thing. So at this point, I just also wanted to briefly go through, using our library as an example of how we incorporate some of these
Then there's 5 more minutes.
elements too. Okay, we'll be quick here. So this is the outside of the building. How we do this too is through the threading of symbols. And again, kind of before when we were talking about like large and small and dark and light and shadows, we're kind of trying to define what can seem somewhat contradictory to develop like a common perception of something. Again, it's that subjective side where the paradox of talking about a lot of these things is we all experience things in a very unique and individual way. And to develop a common language is almost like the first hurdle. But symbols and iconography become really important in this. And so thinking of dialectal design, we're thinking of things that on a local level, but also maybe on a national level, all these different icons or symbols that have a universal kind of meaning to them. And I'm fascinated on that poetical side by looking at a dictionary of symbols. And to me, that's such a unique achievement that we can all be our own little circle, but somehow we can meet and can form this hugely algorithmic and complex Venn diagram and agree on certain things. So we can have dictionary of dreams and symbols and things like that that we all kind of can settle on. So some of these obviously are more aspirational, they're intellectual, they're didactic in nature. They talk about our mission. As walking through the narrative gate of the building, is everyone from Toledo, from the area? Okay. If you ever are back, or if you ever go downtown, contact me and I'll give you a tour of the building too. It's really impactful and a very cool place. The narrative story, the gate of the flow of everything is very cool. This is one of the first steps that you have going into the building. And you're surrounded by the vitrolite glass mural that surrounds, that represents dewy fields, but also kind of serves as a chronological, cultural kind of a depiction of history. And I'm flipping through these. The building, the historic building was completed at the end of the Art Deco period, so a lot of those designs have been threaded through the building too, so it's consistency of these symbols as well. And this edge actually, that is the old, where it opens up, the atrium-like space, that's the edge of the old building. So there is this feeling as you actually walk through that you are going through history and walking into the new building. But you'll see how they even incorporate modern elements with those historical, more Art Deco designs. Fans, lots of these dramatic angles, angular, you'll see that on the side of the building too, the facade. But these are aspirational places too, so we try to embody the ideas, reflect a lot of the library ideas in that architecture. And there's still some of the older iconography too. This is more heavy furniture, and we're actually doing away with this as we go to refurbish the design of the building. So we're going towards more lighter materials. But this is like a more heavy turret. And I'll try and wrap it up here in a few minutes here. I know we're towards the end. But again, some of these Art Deco symbols. And the iconic green lamp, things like that, just to remind people what they are. There's not many of them around, but they're in certain spots too, so they're kind of strategically placed around so that upon kind of wandering place, you'll see those. The old card catalogs, I think we only have 4, but you'll see how we've repurposed them in other spots of the building too. These are coat hooks in the children's room. Kind of cool, just turn them upside down. You'll see spots that imply destination and a sense of placement too. We'll put maps purposely at the end of aisleways so you have a sense of where you are. And these are local, all local maps too. This is, a picture of Peter Navarre, so historic to the area people. Marcy Captor room, names that you'll see, so this is more of that dialectal design and flavor on things. Repurposed items all over the place, coexisting with different types of technology. In the story room, you literally can step into the book, so this idea of story is ever present. And we have three-dimensional kind of dioramas too, so those are all books that have kind of come to life, pop out the books. Sheep in a Jeep. There's different sized doors too, so we actually added those to add light into what was previously a darker room, so that to kind of lighten the air, but we've also kind of riffed on that a little bit to kind of create. And in low seating in children areas, so that you're not living in an adult world, that everything is tailored more to them. Now to wrap it up, I know we're about at that time, but to then kind of go into, just briefly, that wrench of technology aspect. So in making these maker spaces and things like that, where we are challenged kind of with, well, I should say I'm happy with how we've kind of approached it. A lot of places did it, and I was always cringing because I wanted something that would be threaded into our story, into our mission. And I saw a lot of places doing it for more sensational or exhibitional purposes, kind of showing off what they do. We've kind of implemented it into into our, as I say, into our vision. We're burying technology into a larger, or burying technology into a larger vision. It becomes a means to achieve something else. So, I focus this part, really the attention here. This is kind of, I see this as passive, active, dynamic. And you'll see that the library and museum in many ways too is moving towards this. So this is kind of past, present, and future. And we're doing this, I think you'll see our collection, not only our collection represented in this way, but also the roles of librarians too. We're becoming more active and engaging. So we're wanting to draw people in that regard. And I say with this being passive, active, and dynamic, it is kind of this line right here, where we are serving more as a convener. So we're trying to, again, it's about burying the technology into a larger vision. So finding the person in that and making it part of how they achieve something else. And there's obviously more to talk about that at time. So thank you so much. I think my information is around, but I'll leave some cards out too, so if anybody wants to discuss things further. But thank you very much.
Thank you.